My name is Marin Calloway, and I've been 68 years old for just over a month, though lately it feels like decades of life have condensed into each passing second. I pride myself on being independent, practical, and quietly resilient qualities that had carried me through raising a daughter alone and keeping my life afloat in Austin, Texas. Through good times and bad, that Sunday, I pulled into my daughter's driveway. The late afternoon sun gilding the familiar brick facade of the house where I had spent so many holidays and birthdays. I adjusted my coat and smiled at the small garden I'd once helped her plant years ago. Memories of laughter threading through the rows of marigolds. Before I could lift my hand to knock, the door swung open. There he stood, my son-in-law, Mark, arms crossed, lips curled in disdain, who let that old woman, in his words, hit like a slap, shocking in their bluntness, slicing through the calm I'd tried to carry with me. For a moment, I froze, my heart stuttering in disbelief. The neighbor's cat darted across the porch as if startled by the tension radiating from the doorway behind him. My daughter, Olivia, peeked out from the hallway, offering a nervous, uneasy smile. I forced a polite one of my own, but it felt brittle, hollow. I stepped onto the porch, ignoring the sting in my chest, and said softly, "Hello, everyone?" Mark waved a dismissive hand without looking away from his phone, and Olivia muttered a faint, "Hi." "Mom," eyes glued to the screen. I carried my bag inside, each step heavy with the realization that something fundamental had shifted. The house smelled of roasted chicken and lemon, familiar and comforting. Yet the warmth was absent. Sitting down at the table, I watched my granddaughter scroll through her phone, oblivious, and felt the first sparks of that old, simmering hurt that would not let me stay silent. I slid into the chair at the dining table, the polished wood cool beneath my hands, and tried to place myself quietly in the background. The room smelled faintly of rosemary and roasted chicken, a comforting aroma that did little to soothe the knot forming in my stomach. Olivia and Mark exchanged quiet glances across the table, whispering under their breath, laughing at something I couldn't hear. My granddaughter, Lila, was perched at the far end, entirely absorbed in her phone, thumbs flying over the screen every so often. She let out a soft chuckle. Entirely unaware of me sitting just a few feet away, I tried to catch her eye, offer a small smile, but she didn't notice. It was as though I were a ghost in the room I had helped fill with so many memories. Mark cleared his throat loudly, interrupting the chatter, and gestured toward me. "Marin, can you pass the salad?" His voice carried the faintest edge, a reminder of the hierarchy he seemed intent on enforcing. I nodded politely and reached across. Placing the bowl on the table without looking up, Olivia muttered something barely audible about how busy she had been, as though my presence were an afterthought to her own schedule. I forced myself to take a bite of chicken, chewing slowly, letting the silence stretch. Each glance, each murmured remark, each diverted eye added weight to a familiar ache. Years of effort, care, and presence seemed invisible, erased by casual disregard. My hands rested in my lap, clenched slightly, a quiet tension threading through my shoulders. Yet, beneath the sorrow and sharp sting of invisibility, a small ember of recognition flickered. I could feel the quiet grow, the first stirrings of a resolve that would not be ignored. Sitting there, surrounded by laughter and whispers that excluded me, I realized that the room held more than shadows. It held a challenge, and it had been set for me. As I cleared the empty plates from the table, my hands trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from a tide of memories that surged unbidden. Raising Olivia had been its own marathon, I remembered the nights I worked double shifts at the downtown office and then came home to clean houses for extra money, just to make sure her tuition was covered and her life had a semblance of comfort. There were evenings when I sat on the worn couch, peeling potatoes with aching arms, listening to her practice the piano, or helping her with algebra, while my own body begged for rest. I had given every ounce of energy, every spare dime, every ounce of patience I possessed. And yet, sitting in this same house, I felt as if none of it had mattered. I thought of her first school play, the costume I had stitched together at midnight, the pride in her eyes when she bowed before her classmates. I remembered the first computer I managed to buy her by selling my grandmother's heirloom necklace, the weeks of rice and beans that followed just to make up the difference. The sacrifices blurred together laundry, dinners missed, birthdays celebrated on borrowed time, even the years after Olivia married. I had stayed nearby, quietly paying bills when theirs were tight, offering advice they rarely accepted, driving across town to fix problems they pretended they could handle alone. Each act of support was given willingly, a manifestation of love. But now it lingered in the room like a bitter echo, unnoticed and unappreciated. I leaned back in my chair and let the memories wash over me, a mixture of pride and frustration. The weight of all I had done pressed on my chest, heavy and unrelenting, for decades. My life had been devoted to keeping others afloat, often at the expense of myself, yet the quiet, subtle dismissals around me now revealed the painful truth devotion alone did not guarantee recognition. The realization stung sharply, but it also fanned the first sparks of something else. Resolve. Sitting there, amidst the quiet hum of the house, I felt the ember of determination grow. It whispered that my past sacrifices had not been in vain, that I still had the strength to assert myself, and that invisibility was no longer an option. I sat alone in the quiet of my living room later that evening, the hum of the city outside filtering through the slightly open window, the faint scent of jasmine from the garden mixed with the lingering aroma of dinner, a strange comfort in contrast to the storm of emotions swirling in my chest. The laughter and chatter at my daughter's house echoed in my mind, each slight and dismissive word replaying like a loop I could no longer ignore. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of it, not just the disappointment in Olivia or Mark, but the realization that I had been erasing my own presence for the sake of their comfort. I had been careful, patient, forgiving, and silent, yet silence had not protected me. It had allowed me to be diminished, invisible, disregarded. I traced my fingers along the edge of the coffee table, thinking of the home I had worked decades to maintain, the accounts I had managed, the decisions I had made alone to keep life steady for everyone else. The thought struck me sharply: if I continued to bow, to stay silent, I would be forfeiting not just respect, but the authority and dignity I had earned. A new clarity settled in, like sunlight breaking through clouds. I could no longer rely on hope that they would recognize my value or treat me with the decency I deserved. My independence, my choices, my home, they were mine, not privileges to be granted or revoked by others. With that thought came determination. I would act, not out of spite, but to reclaim what had always been rightfully mine. The ember of resolve, kindled over years of unnoticed sacrifice, now flared into something unmistakable. I would no longer shrink to fit their expectations, nor allow my lifetime of effort to be dismissed. As I stood, stretching my stiff limbs, I knew the first steps would be deliberate, careful, and unyielding. For the first time in decades, I felt fully aligned with myself, ready to reclaim control over the life I had built. The next afternoon, Olivia appeared at my door, her expression carefully neutral, as if rehearsed. Behind her, Mark lingered in the doorway, arms folded, his presence like a shadow I couldn't ignore. "Maren," Olivia began softly, "we've been thinking, maybe it would be better if you stayed with us for a while, just until things are easier for you." I studied her carefully, noting the subtle tilt of her head, the rehearsed sweetness in her voice, the way Mark's eyes flicked toward her for confirmation. I remembered all the times they had assumed my compliance, all the quiet sacrifices they had taken for granted. My chest tightened, but I forced a calmness I didn't entirely feel. "I appreciate the offer," I said slowly, placing my hand on the doorframe to steady myself. "But my home is where I am comfortable, where I have lived and built a life with my own decisions. I will not be moving under anyone's suggestion." Mark shifted uncomfortably and stepped forward. "It's just that this house is a lot to manage alone. We can help you with everything: bills, maintenance, so you don't have to worry." I met his gaze steadily. "I've managed it this long, and I will continue to manage it. I'm grateful for your concern, but I do not need supervision. My choices, my home, my life, they remain mine." Olivia opened her mouth, a flash of frustration in her eyes, but I held up a hand, letting my words hang in the air. The silence pressed against them, unyielding, and for the first time I sensed hesitation. Their rehearsed arguments had failed to unsettle me. My resolve, sharpened by years of being overlooked, stood firm. I closed the door gently behind them, the echo of it sealing the boundary I had just drawn. As I sank into my chair, I felt a small, satisfying surge of power, proof that years of quiet endurance had not left me powerless, and that the next steps would be taken on my terms. The following morning, I drove to the law office I had known for decades, the familiar weight of the leather-bound briefcase pressing against my shoulder. Arturo, my longtime attorney and friend, greeted me with a knowing smile, his gray eyes sharp and steady. "Maren," he said, "it's been a while. What brings you here today?" I explained the situation carefully, recounting Olivia's suggestion, Mark's thinly veiled control, and the unease that had settled over my family gatherings. Arturo listened intently, nodding, his hands folded on his desk. "You've been patient," he said finally. "But patience doesn't mean giving up your rights." He pulled a file from the cabinet and slid it across to me. As I scanned the documents, my eyes widened. The house, though legally in Olivia and Mark's names for inheritance purposes, included clauses I had requested years ago: lifelong usufruct, full control over living arrangements, and even the legal authority to sell at my discretion. I looked up at Arturo, incredulous. "You mean I can decide everything, even sell?" He nodded. "Exactly. You've been protecting this quietly all along. No one, neither Olivia nor Mark, can override your decisions while you're alive and of sound mind. You have all the leverage. They just don't know it yet." A thrill of clarity and power coursed through me. Years of feeling overlooked, dismissed, and invisible now seemed like fuel for action. Every slight, every casual disregard, every whispered comment had led to this moment of strategic empowerment. I leaned back in the chair, letting the reality settle. The house, once a source of tension and quiet resentment, was now entirely mine in both rights and control. The anticipation of what I could do next sharpened my focus. Arturo's steady gaze met mine. "Careful planning is key. You have the power, Maren, but how you wield it will define everything." I smiled, the weight of years of silence lifting. This was my turning point, and for the first time in decades, the future felt decisively mine. Back at my house, The quiet felt different, charged, almost electric. Every photograph on the walls, every piece of furniture I had chosen and arranged over decades, seemed to pulse with the memories and sacrifices they represented. I ran my fingers along the edge of the dining table, recalling the late nights I had spent here, helping Olivia with homework or celebrating birthdays. The laughter and tears that had once filled these rooms, now, those memories were mine alone to honor and protect. I called Arturo that evening, outlining my intentions carefully. "I want to sell the house," I said, measuring each word, not to punish anyone, but to reclaim control over my life and secure my independence. He was quiet for a moment, then nodded. "We can do this. Timing, legal documentation, and buyer selection will be key. You have the leverage. We just need to execute it strategically, over the next several days." I focused intently. I contacted a trusted real estate agent, arranging private showings for potential buyers who could appreciate the home without complications. I organized my financial documents, ensuring everything was transparent and above board, leaving no room for interference from Olivia or Mark. I drafted letters and schedules with Arturo's guidance, mapping out exactly when and how the sale would proceed. Every decision felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The thrill of empowerment pulsed beneath the surface, mingling with a careful sense of suspense. I imagined the moment they would finally realize that the house, which they had assumed belonged to them, was no longer under their control. The thought brought a quiet, almost mischievous satisfaction, tempered by my determination not to act out of malice. Late one night, I sat on the porch, watching the lights of Austin stretch across the horizon. The city hummed with life, unaware of the quiet storm I was preparing in my own home. I took a deep breath and smiled. Every step had been deliberate, every detail planned, and soon the balance of power would shift, for the first time in years. I felt fully in command of my future, ready to act decisively and with clarity. The day the buyers signed the papers, I watched from my living room as the final documents were notarized. The house, my sanctuary for more than 20 years, now officially belonged to new owners. Every corner, the kitchen where I had spent endless evenings cooking for Olivia, the garden where Lila had learned to ride her first bike, the walls lined with family photos remained intact, preserved for those who would respect it. I felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of justice that came not from revenge, but from reclaiming what had always been mine. Later that afternoon, Olivia called, her voice tight, trying to mask panic. "Maren, the house. What have you done?" "We were counting on it for the loan," Mark chimed in from the background, his usual calm replaced by a strained urgency. I listened carefully, letting each word sink in. They had assumed control, taken for granted that I would bend, that my lifetime of work would remain theirs to leverage. Now, the tables had turned. Their predicament was immediate. Without the house as collateral, the loan they had relied on to finance renovations and cover other debts could not proceed. Rent for their new apartment was looming, and the reality of financial responsibility landed on them with abrupt weight. I remained composed, polite, and unyielding. My duty was not to punish, but to protect my dignity and independence. Later that evening, I received a text from Lila, hesitant and careful. "Grandma, are you okay? Mom and Dad are freaking out." I smiled softly, replying simply that I was well, and that the house had gone to someone who would care for it. I could almost feel her relief, a quiet acknowledgement that I was still the same grandmother who had always guided and protected her. Even as the adults faltered, sitting in my favorite chair, the sun setting over the Austin skyline, I let the weight of the day settle. The house was sold. my independence secure, and the consequences for Olivia and Mark unexpected, but just were clear. The balance of power had shifted, not through anger or spite, but through careful planning, legal foresight, and the quiet strength I had cultivated over decades. For the first time in years, I felt the satisfaction of true vindication. The first morning in my new Austin apartment. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, casting long, warm beams across the hardwood floors. I moved slowly, savoring the quiet and the space that was entirely mine. Every corner reflected my choices, from the soft rug in the living room to the small herb garden I'd begun on the balcony. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight of expectation lift. Later, Letitia, my longtime neighbor and confidant, stopped by with a basket of pastries. Her eyes sparkled as she took in the apartment. "Maren, it suits you," she said, hugging me tightly. I laughed softly, grateful for the comfort of a friend who had seen me through years of struggle. We talked about the neighborhood, local events, and the simple joys of daily life. And for the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely at peace. I unpacked photographs and keepsakes, arranging them on shelves and tables, reliving moments of pride and laughter without the shadow of judgment or dismissal. Olivia and Mark were no longer looming figures in my immediate space. Their absence was not emptiness, but freedom. That evening, I took Lila to the balcony and showed her the city skyline. She leaned against me, her voice soft and tentative. "Grandma, it's really nice here." I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's ours to enjoy," I said, "and there's room for all the memories we want to make." As the sun set, I sat in my favorite chair, a cup of chamomile tea warming my hands. The apartment was more than a new home. It was a statement, a fresh start, a reclamation of everything I had earned and deserved. For the first time in years, I felt truly in control, free to make choices, set boundaries, and embrace a life lived on my own terms. A week after settling into the new apartment, Lila came over on her own, carrying a sketch pad and a small backpack. She hesitated at the door, a mixture of excitement and nervousness in her eyes. I greeted her with a warm smile, holding the door open. "Come in." "Sweetheart," I said. We spent the afternoon on the balcony, painting the skyline and sharing stories. She asked about the house, and I answered honestly but lightly, emphasizing the new memories we could make together. Lila laughed freely, unburdened by the tension that had shadowed previous visits. Later, I called Olivia briefly. Maintaining a calm, measured tone, I outlined the boundaries clearly. Visits would be scheduled, discussions respectful, and my choices regarding the apartment and finances off limits. Olivia listened, the frustration in her voice tempered by a cautious understanding. I didn't apologize for asserting myself. I simply stated my expectations and left room for cooperation. By the time Lila left, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Relationships could continue, but on terms that preserved my dignity and autonomy. For the first time in decades, I sensed the possibility of meaningful connections without compromise or subjugation. Sitting alone afterward, watching the city lights flicker against the dusk, I allowed myself a small, contented smile. The past had shaped me, but it no longer defined me. I was fully present in this moment, respected, independent, and ready to embrace the life I had reclaimed.